My analysis is very gloomy. All the red lights are flashing and you feel powerless to stop this First World War march towards the trenches. You know exactly what's going to happen in the trenches and you just want people to say stop, literally stop the war. That is all you want to say. No one's in the driving seat. No one is actually saying, hey, hang on a moment, let's just wait.
We are tracking breaking news out of the Middle East, an attack on Iran's consulate building in Syria.
And this very well could escalate the war.
Some new developments on a threat to Israel. Iran has vowed revenge for its strike on its consulate, and U.S. officials say that attack could come at any moment.
Breaking news in a major escalation of the crisis in the Middle East. Iran has started a direct attack on Israel by launching dozens of drones to attack targets there.
I think of myself as very much a sort of post-war generation, the generation that didn't go through 2 world wars. A very gloomy thought, but we could be a pre-war generation. We could be the generation before the next big world war.
We are devoted to the defense of Israel. We will support Israel. We will help defend Israel. And Iran will not succeed.
Israel has tried several times to persuade various American presidents into attacking Iran, and the last person who refused was Donald Trump. So a clear war aim here is to change the nature and disposition of the forces that are immediately next to Israel's borders. Are they succeeding? Well, what they are doing is stoking a regional war, and they feel confident in their ability to defend 2 or 3 fronts at the same time, despite what this is doing to the internal Israeli economy, and despite the clear warnings from people in the Israeli army that they won't have the troops for 2 offensives at the same time. If we can't dislodge Hamas from Gaza, what are we going to do with a much better armed, much more sophisticated army in Hezbollah? Are we not going to have a recipe for permanent war? And despite Hezbollah's reluctance to get involved in this, it is the Israeli side that are constantly testing the waters. So their war aim of changing the Middle East, yes, they are changing the Middle East, but not in their favor, because what they're going to end up with is a whole series of soft borders with infiltration coming across. They'll make themselves much more vulnerable to the sort of raid that Hamas did on October the 7th, and they'll have their own Palestinian population literally locked up in cages in the West Bank. They've armed the settlers. It is an absolute recipe for permanent conflict breaking out and absolutely no stability in any of this. So are they changing the Middle East? Yes, but absolutely not in their favor. And we're repeating the same mistakes. The Middle East, if you think about it, nothing has worked well for America. Nothing. It's all gone wrong. Afghanistan went wrong. Iraq went wrong. Syria is a wreck. Yemen is a wreck. Gaza is a wreck. It's just wrecks. There's nothing holding the Middle East together. Everything that America has tried in the Middle East has gone wrong. Literally everything. Joe Biden has said that if you're hit by a horrendous terrorist attack, don't follow what we did after 9/11 as a model. He's also criticized Israel for a disproportionate response. And yet, he's still arming Israel. I mean, Israel's dropped so many bombs that they couldn't have done it without American resupply. And he doesn't have the political capital to stop arming Israel because he doesn't have that capital on the Hill, and he doesn't want to give that gift to Trump or to the Republicans, and he's in an election year. But the interesting thing about Biden's presidency are a number of people who really are experts in the Middle East, the staffers, the State Department officials, ex-diplomats, up in arms about what Biden is letting Israel do. And they warned right from the start. Biden opted to say that everything that Israel was doing was justified, and he repeatedly stopped international moves for a ceasefire. And he now finds himself in a position where America is involved in a regional shootout with the Houthis. You had the 4th trip to the region, which says something in itself, of Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, designed to stop a regional war. And he ends his trip by the US hitting the Houthi radar installations. So a trip that was designed to stop a regional war ends in the first shots of a regional war breaking out. Now, there are 2 points about this. One is that the Houthis can withstand these airstrikes because they've withstood 7 years of it before, and they're totally hardened. They know what they're doing. On the other side, both the US and the UK do not know what they're doing, and they haven't got the strategic patience to get sucked into a shooting war. The Houthis have staged attacks on Western shipping, affecting global trade and global container traffic. The Houthis are demonstrating their power to make themselves felt in terms of global trade. They said they were reacting to the continued slaughter in Gaza. They would regard that as justified, and America would say we are absolutely going to defend the right of international trade to go through. It's not a question of who's right and who's wrong in this case. It's a question of who will prevail. The Houthis are playing a long game. The West is still trying to send shock and awe gunboat diplomacy. And in this world, they're playing a 19th century game where the Houthis are playing a 21st century game.
Are the airstrikes in Yemen working?
Well, when you say working, are they stopping the Houthis? No.
So it's no longer a question of the blind leading the blind when it comes to analyzing this really tortuous relationship between the US and Israel, with Biden saying one thing and Netanyahu doing something completely different. It is the strategically weak being led by the tactically angry. One thing that has happened is that Netanyahu has completely destroyed quite a strong personal relationship with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Putin has still got assets, got a lot of assets, military assets in Syria. He's still got his batteries of S-300 anti-aircraft missiles, which he does not activate when Israel planes fly over Syrian airspace and hit an Iranian commander, but he could activate. He has cards to play, especially as the Ukrainian fight back against the Russian invasion of Ukraine has faltered. He's now feeling much more confident. This means he's got more energy and more time to think of how he can also hurt or affect American and Western interests in the Middle East. He hasn't withdrawn from Syria. He's still there. So Putin has got cards to play. Iran has got cards to play. As far as I can see, Israel and the West have played all its cards and are in a much, much worse position. And they're just watching us get weaker and trip over ourselves. It's always worth keeping your eye on who's not fighting a war in the Middle East and how much they're profiting from staying on the sidelines. And clearly China and its influence on the Middle East is rising as America is falling. If you remember, Chinese diplomats were called in very much to the American surprise by the Saudis to stage the diplomatic coup of re-establishing relations with Iran. And China is quietly sitting on the sidelines, establishing good relations with Arab states, growing in influence simply because it is not involved in all of these self-defeating wars. The relationship between Arab groups and all Arab states, and even also the Palestinian factions with Moscow and Beijing, is improving as it worsens with the traditional colonial masters of London and Washington. And in the long run, this is not serving American interests. It's losing soft power, its hard power is getting less and less effective, and it's losing the battle of world public opinion. When that happens, you have another military power that can step in. This is not to say that China as a colonial power is any more beneficent than any other colonial powers. I have my eyes open about China and also for Russia, but they're rubbing their hands at the moment at the disarray in which the West is acting. And Western forces still have that level of arrogance about them. I mean, the one thing that they could think about is not prizing as much their personal relationships with the dictators, with the generals, with Israel, but trying to re-establish some sort of relationship between the West and the Arab people. And they could do it. They could do it with aid. There are lots of ways in which they do it. But the West conceives of its policy is with military and royal elites, and they themselves don't have the legitimacy amongst the people when it comes to Palestine. So you go back to first principles and say, right, let's try and deal with the Arab people and persuade them and interact with them, and let's hear what they're actually saying rather than just doing what we do anyway, because they're absolutely on the path of oblivion. We all know that Israel has over 200 nuclear warheads. So there has to be a concern amongst the rational military establishment, both in Israel and also the Western military establishment, that the government should not fall into the hands of the likes of Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, who are desperate to turn this conflict, which is a limited conflict over land, into a religious conflict with Islam, particularly over who prays where in Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the continual attempt by the Temple Mount groups to destroy the Dome on the Rock. Would the world feel comfortable with nuclear weapons if the government of Israel was in those people's hands? I don't think so. And I think at some point, you always just want to say, stop, literally stop the war. That is all you want to say. Stop the onslaught on Gaza, negotiate the release of the hostages that are still alive, start talking to people, calm the thing down. The Houthis would then calm down, Hamas would calm down, Hezbollah would calm down. No one wants a war on all fronts. And eventually the population of northern Israel could return to its homes. And Israel would not be paying the price. It is at the moment in literally thousands and thousands of disabled soldiers whose numbers they are concealing, but it's going to become a very, very big problem. They also too are taking casualties in the war, although they're disguising this. I mean, the message just has to be stop the war, because really we've had enough of it in the Middle East, and we know exactly what's going to happen, that the war will stop, months down the line, but with so much more misery for both Jew and Arab. What's been really important in the coverage of this awful conflict is the role that independent media have played, that Middle East Eye have played, and Double Down. I would urge you all to support that media, because that's the media that is actually going to do the real reporting in the war. Support Double Down News on Patreon, and do read Middle East Eye.